Hey, it's Paul. Before we get started, we need to make sure that you, the listener, knows that we are not mental health professionals and not qualified to prescribe therapies or therapeutic advice. We are also not your gurus and have no aspirations in that direction. We are simply two people who are trying to feel better and do better in our lives, just like you. And now, on with the show.
Paul, my brother, what's happening?
What's up, Happy Snappy? How are you?
Good. I love your pet names for me. What's Shake and Bacon?
I try to come up with a new one every week. It's not always there at the tip of my tongue. I don't spend hours on it, in case you didn't know. Well, I'm calling about the podcast episode, and it's my week to bring up a topic, and I kind of want to do one this week that's sort of a hot button, and that is men and shame, the shame we carry around. I know.
Yeah, that's a deep one, dude. Let's dive into that, though. It's necessary.
Are you into it?
Yeah, I'm totally into it.
Okay,
let's do it.
Let's do it. I'm not even going to make an intro joke like we usually do about it, because it's a fairly serious thing. But it's going to be a great episode, I think, and I'm really glad you're on board, and I can't wait to do it with you.
Awesome. I'm excited. And let's do this. Let's open it up.
All right. I'll see you in the studio. Okay.
All right. Later on, dude.
Bye.
Freedom over fame. Freedom over fame. The cycle stays the same.
We get a lot of messages from society as to how men are supposed to show up in the world. Physical strength, a competitive nature, and a stoic demeanor are often prized as the pinnacle of manhood.
But do these expectations represent a roadmap to the realization of healthy masculinity? Or does trying to live up to them and failing engender a sense of never being good enough?
Today on the show, we're talking about the shame that men carry and the effects it has on our thoughts, feelings, and behavioral choices, and how working with our shame can bring us to a more integrated view of masculinity that is more in tune with our true selves, so it can be emotionally available to our loved ones and to our communities, and step into an increasingly holistic masculinity that contains both strength and vulnerability.
So if you're ready for takeoff,
let's go. Okay, Nora, before we do anything, I think we should tell our listeners about our intentions for this episode, because it sounds like a pretty heavy topic that may veer into sort of a prescriptive rant about all the things that are wrong with men.
Yeah, that's not what we're after here. I love men. We don't think that men are a problem to be quote unquote fixed. And we want to draw a very clear distinction between some of the things that men do and the individuals that they are. And for that reason, we take issues with terms like quote unquote toxic masculinity, which I think only serves to push men away from the conversation that we so desperately need. We need them to be involved in, and that usually exacerbate the problems that we claim to be seeking to fix.
Yeah, so that is true. I think that as a man, sometimes receiving information or criticism about my behavior can feel pretty personal, and that has everything to do with the shame I carry around. And I think both men and women can have feelings that are less than or not enough, but we deal with those feelings in very different ways. Unfortunately, the way that most men deal with them is through the lens of shame, which often causes us to stuff our feelings, to not ask for help, and to avoid being vulnerable at all costs.
Right. And those, suppressed, stuffed feelings, they tend to build up until they need a release. And then that release is usually in the only emotional form that society has deemed acceptable for men, which is rage and anger. Yeah, instead of being able to feel safe in vulnerability and work through their shame and trauma, a lot of boys and men become emotionally avoidant, and then they don the masks of the socially acceptable masculine tropes that, in, I think, the best case, don't serve you, and in the worst case, hurt the ones you love in your community.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. I think this can be a pretty loaded topic. So I encourage the male listeners, as we move through this conversation, to please remember that the idea for this episode was born out of a love for men and their potential, and not from a place of further shaming or demonizing their behaviors.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll be frank about what we have seen and experienced, and hope that maybe by giving examples, we're also giving permission to look objectively at some of those behaviors that you might see in yourself, without judging yourself as a person and furthering the shame you may feel, and then exacerbating the problem we're trying to address.
Yeah. Lastly, I'll add that While we strive to have maximum inclusivity in this podcast, we want to include everybody in it. We would never pretend to understand the nuances of male experience in groups which we aren't a part of.
Yeah.
So if it seems that we're focusing on cis hetero men and women in this discussion, we assure you that it's out of respect for the experiences that aren't as common to us and not a wanton exclusion of other viewpoints, right?
Yeah.
All right. I think we've disclaimed enough here at the top of this. That's a long disclaimer. But I think it's necessary. You know, you want to know what we're talking about and how we're approaching it before we get there, or else you might take it in a way it's not intended. So
yeah, we don't mean to criticize. We're just kind of addressing some of the things that I think you have to become aware in order to address and to move towards that integrated masculinity. And if you're not aware of how this manifests and how it affects people in your community and your relationships, then you can't do anything to grow that.
Yeah, for sure. And we're not just going to point out the problem. We're actually going to talk about solutions as well.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of media that I hear is very good at pointing out the problems that men create in the world, but not very good about offering solutions on how they can grow into a more integrated masculinity, which is what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
All right, let's start with definitions, shall we? So let's talk about guilt and shame, because I think they're not conflated. Well, sometimes they're conflated, and they're not the same things, right?
No, they're not.
What do you feel guilt is, Nora?
Guilt is when you feel guilt, you're kind of grappling with something that you've done, a behavior, and you feel remorse about it, and you can work through it by accepting the responsibility of the behavior or doing something proactive about it. Guilt, it's like I grew up in the Catholic faith, so I know a lot about guilt.
It's a pretty loaded subject for you.
And I also know a lot about shame because of Catholicism. So,
right, yes, yeah.
But yeah, guilt can be, I guess I used to think it wasn't a useful emotion, but I think when you feel guilt, it can be a signal that, as an emotion, it can spur us to make something right and take responsibility for the things that we've done that might, as you would say, Paul, are maybe unskillful.
Yeah. I agree. At its best, I think it's a kind of self-generated feedback that lets you know that something in your behavior is off.
Yeah.
And you should do something to fix it. That's all. But people take it as more than that. But I think at its best, that's what the function of guilt is.
Exactly. It can be useful in becoming aware. And simply put, I would say that guilt shows up as thinking I did something wrong. Like I behaved in a way that was off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the difference between guilt and shame is that when you feel shame, you're not grappling with anything you've done, but rather who you think you are as a person. So it's wrapped in your identity. And shame is much harder to reconcile when you feel fundamentally broken or damaged or bad. And unlike guilt, the shame-based mindset influences all of our thoughts, all of our feelings, and our behavioral choices, with very damaging results. The way I would put it, instead of like the guilt being I did something wrong, shame shows up as thinking I am inherently wrong. Yes.
Yeah. I am broken. I am incompetent. I am, whatever it is as a person. Like it's irredeemable, right? You can't get back from that, from a feeling of shame like that. So let's do some examples of messages that boys and men receive that foster shame here. So I just made a quick list here. So one is your net worth equals your personal worth. That's a big one that we're fed all the time,
Capitalism,
right? If you're not
yay.
Capitalism, yay, right? Number 2 here is avoid vulnerability at all costs. That's definitely given to us. Don't cry out here. If you need to do that, go in there. Nobody wants to see that. That kind of thing. Handle problems alone and don't ask for help. That's the old cowboy myth, that we go for. Pew pew, the lone rider. We're out here doing our thing, right?
It's also the stereotype of like, why don't you just stop and ask for directions, right?
That as well. Yeah. Have a gym body. That's that especially in the last 30 years, I would say that's really come up as a thing that is held up as a pinnacle. Your six pack or whatever it is. Be sexually promiscuous. That's age old, right?
Yep.
That is definitely something we all get as soon as we get in, I'd say junior high, something like that. The pressure starts on that. Don't act girly. That's from a young age.
Yep.
Have all the answers. That's another not ask for help thing, right? Play hurt. And by that, I mean, ignore injuries and stay in the game, right? Go to work sick, etc. Things like that. things that are not helpful to anybody, and compete. That's always one. It's way. The thought is that cooperation is not as good as competition, and
Right.
I think the opposite there. And then just comparison to another, right? This can be from your parents, like, why aren't you like Danny? He's going to be a doctor or whatever, or it can be from anybody. Can put that shame, or you can put that shame on yourself. So that's just a short list of stuff that I made. It came off the top of my head of things that I've experienced, right?
Yeah. I also wanted to say that the compete thing, it's like, I think there's a difference between healthy competition and then competing to continuously dominate, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so I just want to make that distinction that I don't.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching says, that when people, competition is okay, but when the wise compete with each other, they do it like little children. They do it for fun. They do it for joy in the competition. They don't do it to dominate the other person.
Right.
And that's,
we
that's
are.
another way Lao Tzu just always shows up in my conversations.
I think that's going to be our goal for every episode from here on out.
Put Lao Tzu in.
Is to have
Okay.
Paul tie it back to Lao Tzu.
Yeah, well, I could probably do it. He talked about everything in that little
Challenge
book. So there you go. All right, let's move on. What are some ways, Nora, in which shame manifests itself in men's behavior? We made another little list here.
I mean,
so
this isn't the only ways, but these are some of the ways that I could think of.
none of this is comprehensive,
yeah,
folks. We've
no,
got like an hour
exactly.
to talk about it. So yeah, there you go.
Bravado, machismo. That's one
Yep.
way. Again, the sexual conquest and objectification.
Yeah,
Misogyny.
yeah,
Good old
devaluing
classic
women. for
misogyny.
sure.
Yeah.
The old classic misogyny.
Yeah, and homophobia, of course.
Sure.
Rage. That's definitely perfectionism.
Yeah, that's one of mine.
Again, coming back, the control and domination, like we were just talking about. Victimhood.
Yeah, I'm guilty. Yeah, here
I mean,
as well.
I think, lack of responsibility for actions and relationships, not taking responsibility for them. Lack of emotional maturity or an inability to express or sit with difficult emotions in a healthy way.
Man, that should be at the top of the list.
Yeah,
I'm telling
right?
you, that's like you just look outside your door, man. I mean, that is everywhere.
Yeah, it's
Pervasive, as they say. Yeah.
Well, also tied to that is low emotional IQ, detachment.
Yeah. Detachment, self-isolation.
Yeah, which really I think is really a root cause of the loneliness epidemic that we're
no
currently-
question.
yeah.
And also like you just feed on yourself in that kind of
Yeah.
isolation. I
Yep.
mean, it's also what's behind a lot of, mass shootings and
Yeah,
other things
exactly,
like that.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then the last one that I came up with was individualism over collective well-being. So
Right,
like
yeah,
thinking
get
of the
yours.
self, go and get yours, and
Yep.
everyone else is left to their own devices. Yeah,
Screw it. Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
All right. Well, those are our little lists, but let's get into the meat of this thing here. So, Paul, Paul. You're not Paul. I'm Paul. I get really confused in here. We look so similar. Nora,
Yes.
you've been around men your whole life. You've
Yep.
got brothers. You had a strong father figure in your life,
Yeah, thankfully.
and you have a lot of male friends.
A lot
so
of cousins.
what-
I have a big family. The whole nine. Lots of
The whole
guy
nine,
friends.
right?
Yep.
So what shame is it that you see when you look at the men in your life or the men that you've been in contact with?
Yeah, I mean, again, I love men. I'm consistently checking in on my brothers. I was consistently kind of checking in on my dad, trying to be that like safe place for them to open up. So, I want to start with that. But I think that most of the shame stems from, again, the ideology that we aren't good enough, right? And I think that's the root of all shame. That in order to quote unquote deserve love, and acceptance, we have to look, act, behave in a socially scripted way. And the main way that I see how many men process that script is they internalize it and then accept the ideology that they aren't fundamentally enough. And then when people weaponize humiliation against them, it kind of furthers a shame spiral there.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think that by and large, boys are shamed for expressing a range of emotions early on. And it teaches them to suppress their emotional range. And I think by doing that, it stunts their ability to emotionally regulate as well as hindering their capacity for empathy. And
No question. Yeah.
I also believe that this kind of emotional stunting, the stunting of emotional regulation and emotional intelligence is the underlying root of the loneliness epidemic, like I just said. And that inherent shame can manifest in all sorts of malignant behavior. But typically, we see it like outwardly as rage, which is like the only emotion deemed quote unquote acceptable for boys and men. We see it as like destruction and violence, often projected on the people they perceive as quote unquote weaker, or sometimes projected on to themselves, like they internalized, as we can see with statistics revolving around addiction and suicide rates in men. So it's a huge problem.
I can see all those things. And while I've never been a physically violent person or contemplated suicide in any serious way, I certainly have turned those feelings of shame on myself. For me, I manifested it through addictions and basically trying to simultaneously protect myself by numbing my pain and destroy myself by taking as many drugs and drinking as much alcohol and having as much sex as I could in my younger days, which had serious ramifications on my personal relationships, my career, my self-image, and my overall worldview, you know?
Yeah. And that also has ramifications on how other people see you and relate to you, of course, right? And furthering the loneliness.
Yeah.
There is a quote by Bell Hooks that I love.
Okay.
And if you don't know who Bell Hooks is,
Check her out.
Yeah, go check out her books, especially like she's got so many great books about these topics. She wrote, "The feeling that I've done something wrong, that I really don't know what it is, that there's something terribly wrong with my very being, leads to a sense of utter hopelessness. This hopelessness is the deepest cut of the mystified state. It means there's no possibility for me as I am. There's no way I can matter or be worthy of anyone's love as long as I remain myself. I must find a way to be someone else, someone who is lovable, someone who is not me." And I think that quote, just in general, I think sums up so much of what we're talking about here today, and in particular, what we'll call the donning masks. I think this is the root of men donning masks, because they're trying to be someone who is worthy of love, not knowing that by just being here, they're worthy of love and loving themselves.
There's a documentary called "The Masks We Wear" that came out in 2015. I think it came out when I was teaching high school, and we watched it at the high school that I worked at. And it has its problems, but it certainly does outline this very thing about masking up, armoring up, it's and how boys feel that they have to absolutely fit into categories to be worthy of any kind of love or attention.
It's what a lot of researchers who do a lot more research about this call the man box. It's like stuffing boys and men into this very rigid, personal prison of not being able to express themselves in a healthy, safe way. I see many men learn to weaponize humiliation to control other men's behaviors. And usually that humiliation is framed around the fear of feminization as identity, which says a lot about like how women are viewed in our society. And you can hear it like, if you're a man, you might have been told as a boy, or we've definitely seen this in our society of like saying man up or be a man, whatever that means. There's also like the don't be gay or don't be a quote unquote pussy, and the terms simp and cuck, and there's so many different ways that we can hear where men weaponize that. And to be clear, some women weaponize this humiliation just as much as some men do. I find it deeply damaging to all genders, and it breeds very shaky grounds for men's identity, their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. It's as if collectively we continue to lead men to build their own prisons and put themselves in solitary confinement, and then wonder why the world is suffering so much. I think if systems are made by people to benefit people, we can see that men are working to uphold the system rather than the system upholding men. And instead of being a product of these social systems, we need men to change the systems with the product, which is themselves. And so I think
wait, hold up. Say that again for those in the back. That was the most brilliant little quote right there. So that last part.
So we live in society in these kind of social systems, right? And the systems are created by people to benefit people, correct? Do you follow that? Yeah.
Yes, I'm following it.
So a lot of the times I ask myself the questions is like, is the system upholding the people or are the people upholding the system, right? And I feel like in one way we can look at capitalism, and it feels like currently the people are upholding the system of capitalism and not vice versa. But what I'm saying, I think part of the solution for the systems to uphold men is that instead of being a product of these social systems, we need men to change the systems with the product, and the product is themselves. So they have to change themselves in order to change the system.
I love that. I love that idea.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah.
And Paul,
great.
all right, here's a question.
You should write a book. You should have a podcast. That's amazing.
You know, usually like old Nora would have been like, no way. And now I'm like, all right, well, maybe I'm open to it. Attached, or what is it? Open to everything, attached to nothing.
There you go.
Anyway, Paul, you're a man, Paul.
Yes, I am.
How has shame manifested in your life?
Oh, man. How hasn't it? I mean, myriad ways. I mean, you live in a constant state of shame for the most part when you're a young man, over a lot of things. But
rough.
I think my earliest memory of shame was about my body, and I'm relatively thin now, but when I was a kid, I wasn't. And before I went to kindergarten, I don't think I had a lot of trouble with it. I had kind of a hippie, free to be you and me upbringing that had other issues surrounding it, like loneliness and abandonment, but not generally shame. I wasn't really shamed by my relatives at all and my closest. And, I was raised by a lot of women too. That's the thing. I got handed around between aunts and my grandmas and, things like that. And so I didn't have a whole lot of male, you should do this, you should do that type of stuff happening to me. But when I got to kindergarten, that changed. And, that's when I first experienced sort of the deep burning shame that kids are so good at inflicting on other kids,
God, yeah.
And up until that point, I think I felt fine about my body. But when those kids discovered that a nifty wordplay on my last name was over a ton, my last name is Overton, right? That a whole new world of shame sort of opened up for me then. It was really the first time I felt unlovable, and I carried that around for a long time, man, like many, like way too long. And sometimes I still get flashes of that kid and how he felt. It's easily one of my most deeply experienced episodes of shame. And I went on to create so much wreckage in my life and the lives of others because of not being able to drop that freaking story and just love myself. It was dependent on
what
those stupid little kids, exactly. Which of course gave me even more reasons to be ashamed and deny myself love and try to destroy myself. In fact, a lot of my work has been to reconnect in terms of my therapy and things like that. It's been to reconnect with with myself at that age and show that kid the love he deserved then, as well as finding forgiveness for those early tormentors that I had, and their meanness was, I came to realize after, therapy and meditation and reading and everything else, their meanness was just their own manifestation of their pain, and just thrown on me. And I can generate compassion around that stuff now, whereas I would not be able to in the past. So instead of holding a grudge, I can, what's Gandhi saying? A jailer is as much a prisoner as his prisoner, And so, holding a grudge is like that. You're still in jail.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You're still in jail. You gotta. I'm forgiving everyone now. It's been a very freeing process. I mean,
it's funny you say that because we have an episode on forgiveness.
yes. If you haven't heard our episode on forgiveness, go on back a couple episodes and listen to that.
Down some of that, but the importance of that. That's huge, and that's it's huge for anyone's kind of healing journey. Which, I kind of punch myself in the face for saying healing journey. But here we are.
Man, do I hate the word? I hate the word healing journey? I mean, don't talk to me about my healing journey. Fuck off. I don't want to talk about my healing journey.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know where I'm coming from. I also want to say, thank you for sharing that story, because I think in particular, we focus so much on women's body shame, and there's plenty of that. And when you're talking about that story, I'm like, oh, I can relate. And, just being a woman in the world, it's... As a woman in the world, you're consistently shamed for your body, right? So it cuts deep. So thank you for sharing that.
And not only that, but when you're a little kid, like if nobody teaches you how to eat, especially if you're like, my family wasn't like at the poverty line, but we weren't rich either, and like some of the stuff we ate was packaged stuff. This happens a lot, right? And it's full of carbohydrates, it's full of sugar, it's full of preservatives, it's full of all this stuff. And, that didn't happen a lot. My mom cooked a lot, but I also kind of was able to free eat. Like nobody said, maybe you should regulate yourself here or anything like that. So, by the time you show up in kindergarten, it's not your fault if you're overweight. Nobody told you need to regulate that stuff unless they did it through shame, which probably made you eat more, right? So there you go.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And everything you said, absolutely. And it's also, as kids, you don't understand until much later that, well, and some of us might not even get there, but the kids that are relentlessly teasing you, like you said, it's their own shit coming out, right?
Yeah.
Projected onto
but
you.
you can't understand
don't
that when you're
understand
that
as a
young.
kid.
No,
You're just,
they just,
it's rough.
you just take it on yourself instead.
It wires you differently for sure.
Yep.
Can you dive into a bit to explain how you started to that reconnection with yourself, and like how could that look for someone who has had a similar experience to start healing themselves in that way?
Yeah, I can't remember what book it was, but I think it began with a book where I started to visualize myself as my younger self in different stages of my life, and sort of identifying the hurts that went along with those stages. But it started to be in earnest when I started EMDR, and I found out how to sort of really drop into those feelings. And then meditation as well helped me with it. It's it's slow going and it's still ongoing. These wounds don't ever completely go away, but they do turn into scars that don't bother you nearly as much. And it's like it's like having a knee that gets achy when it rains. Sometimes you get reminders of the pain you went through, but they're fleeting. They don't last that long, and you can work yourself out of them by giving yourself love and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing therapy gave me was a tool of looking at that. For others as well, looking at others as hurt children. Because if I picture someone's behavior through the lens of the hurt child, I can see where it's coming from and generate empathy for them and compassion for the wound that is very much still open in most people and will manifest itself in like inappropriate behavioral ways, and you just go, okay, well, that's a them problem, but I also can say I have compassion for that them problem because I see your pain.
Yeah, it's like,
I see that this is coming from a place of pain, Yeah. The other one I was going to talk about, and there's been hundreds of incidences of shame in my life. Obviously, I said, your whole childhood as a boy is about living with shame. But the next time I experienced like one that really threw me for a loop was after graduate school. I was dating this girl that I knew from high school, and we decided to move in together. And it became pretty apparent pretty quickly that there were a lot of things wrong with me that needed fixing in her mind. And and being 24 and trying to have a successful relationship, I took on all those things as true because I was already covered in shame. It wasn't a very hard pill to swallow. I thought I was garbage, and she reflected that. So it fit in with my worldview and self-image perfectly. It wasn't until years after we broke up that I realized I was in an emotionally abusive relationship and that I wasn't the source of every problem she found with me. It was her own pain she was putting on me. It was the hurt people and all that stuff, right? But I've forgiven her too, man. It's got to go all the way across the board, man. You got to release it somehow. And it takes a long time. But, you got to knock off you got to knock off that checklist and keep forgiving people all the way down it and keep forgiving yourself for not knowing what you didn't know.
Yeah, I'm really sorry you went through that. That's like that's a hard story, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm not sorry I went through any of my life anymore because it wouldn't have made me search so hard for something else if I didn't go through that stuff. I think I would have been a lot lazier about my spiritual life and about my search for not improvement, but my search for peace.
Yeah. I mean, I understand that. And I think just you sharing that story is going to help people identify the parts of their relationships or even their past relationships that were like possibly more damaging than they recognize. So,
yeah.
And you made a point, like women, like I said, women can also weaponize shame, and some women take on relationship with men as like projects, quote unquote.
Yeah, that's definitely what I was in this.
Yeah, it's like that whole molding men into their version of like a quote unquote good, perfect partner. And
right.
It's like you can't spell projection without the word project. Right?
Bingo. Yeah.
To me, it seems like a way for someone to avoid their own pain by laser focusing on yours and then selling her version of how to quote unquote fix you in order for you to become quote unquote lovable, and we can see how screwed up all of that is. And the thing is, you deserve love because you come from love, the way that we all deserve love because we all come from love. None of us, if you're here, you deserve love.
Yeah, no
Full
question. I
stop.
completely agree. But when you're in your own shit,
Yeah.
Nora,
Yeah.
it's really hard to picture yourself as deserving of love. So
Hmm.
you rely on others to be a mirror of your worth for you,
Hmm.
which is like the worst thing you could possibly do. There are hundreds of times I felt shame of one kind or another. And the really insidious thing about all of it is that if you already consider yourself to be worthless or unlovable, you set out to continually reprove that to yourself and
Yeah.
everybody else in a sick kind of cycle of bad behavior leading to more shame, more wreckage that you leave behind you, more pain, and on and on. There's this great passage from The Little Prince by Exupéry that perfectly points to this, and he's talking. The Little Prince is talking to a character called the Tippler, and he says, "What are you drinking?" demanded the Little Prince, or why are you drinking? And the Tippler says, "So that I may forget." And the Little Prince says, "Forget what?" And the Tippler says, "Forget that I'm ashamed." And the Little Prince says, "Ashamed of what?" And he's trying to help this guy, and the guy says, "Ashamed of drinking." And that perfectly
Yeah.
encapsulates the cycle of both addiction and shame
Yeah,
at the
it's the
same time, right?
self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like where
You
you're
got it.
like, okay, I think about this and therefore I'm going to do this. And you just kind of create that loop in your head that like, this is how I am because you're doing it, and
Yeah.
yeah,
And
it's a loop.
it takes a lot. It takes a lot of balls to try to turn that around. The
Hmm.
people who are like, and I don't have any of them in my life, but I know they exist. They're like, "Why are you doing therapy?" Or
Yeah.
"You're a pussy for going to therapy. Like, why don't you do it
Oh
yourself?"
God.
Fuck
Yeah,
that.
fuck that.
Because listen, it is the bravest thing you can possibly do
I
to
agree.
face your own demons. I mean, you have to get cozy with your demons when you do this work,
Yep.
right? And it's not easy or comfortable to go into that darkness, but it is necessary. And
Hmm.
the cosmic joke of all this is that if you do turn it around after you do all that work, you could lose your friends, you may lose your primary relationship, or you may have tension with family members that wasn't there before. I'm not saying any of that'll happen, but sick people don't like it when you get well. I can't
Hmm.
remember who said that. That's actually a quote and that's stuck in my mind, and I can't remember. I might have been Byron Katie, and I apologize, author, if it was you and I didn't get it right. But you know, anybody who has a vested interest in you staying the same is going to have trouble dealing with your changes, even if they're good for you.
Hmm.
And I think the key to getting through that for me was to remember that a big part of self-love is to prioritize my own wellness over other people's perceived need for me to remain static.
Hmm.
It's not my job to make other people comfortable by dimming my light or minimizing myself. And if they can't get with the program, if they're not on the Paul train, then they don't love me for who I am and probably need to disembark at the next station.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's how that's got to go from now on. And that's, any type of boundary setting like that you do, people are going to be upset by it,
Yeah. No, it's true.
you know?
Well, first off, I also want to say that jumping on the Paul train is a really good time and definitely worth your time and energy because I've
Whoop,
known Paul
whoop.
for God over 20 something years. And
Yeah, almost 30.
yeah,
Yeah.
dude, Paul, you're freaking awesome. You're one of the many
Thanks,
men
man.
that I love. So
Thanks, man.
yeah. But I totally feel what you're saying there. And it's something that my therapist kind of forewarned me about as we were like delving into the EMDR stuff. And she was warning me that as I evolve through EMDR and get better creating like boundaries for myself, that some of my relationships might change in drastic ways because people may have a vested interest again in me staying
Yeah.
the same way and behaving the same way for their benefit. So it's like that codependence, right? And
Classic.
it's classic codependence. And so it's not up to us to mold ourselves or to, into other people's expectations or to dim our shine if they can't bask in our light,
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
go get some sunglasses,
Exactly.
MFer,
Yeah. And it sucks in a way because most of us don't like feeling alone, and this work can feel pretty lonely sometimes, especially if you're on a spiritual journey. But that's not permanent. Those people that drop off as you transform yourself are making room for the love you deserve
Yeah.
in your life, in my opinion, but both for yourself and from others,
Yep.
To become lovable in your own eyes is the whole game, man. That's everything. And once you begin to get there, the right people who love you unconditionally start to show up in your life
Yeah.
like magic.
It does. It
But there's
definitely,
got to be a lot of trimming,
yeah.
before then.
And it can
Yeah.
feel risky in so many ways, but like again, it's setting up the safe parameters and the safe people and the safe situations to kind of explore that stuff in order to expand, And I really do feel like we're either expanding or we're contracting, and to really
Yeah,
like,
you can either choose love or you can choose
yeah,
fear. It's always that in my
exactly.
head. Does it feel like it's contracting or does it feel like it's expanding? Expanding is adding love to the situation, and contracting is just reacting out of fear
Yep.
and armoring up again. And the more I go, the more I try to drop that armor, the more I try to stay open all the time. And it's not, it never. Yeah, I'm going to talk about this later, but it's never perfect. Just
Yeah.
put it that way,
That's
right?
for sure.
You're always doing both. Sometimes you're going to contract and you need to work on expanding more, and that just happens. It's absolutely natural. There's no perfect way to do this
Right.
thing.
And again,
All right, Nora.
we're not going for
Yeah,
perfection. We're going for better.
we're going for
Always.
better.
Right.
That's it. Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. So speaking of better, now that we've gone through our sort of introductory, chit chat about the shame in our lives and stuff, let's talk about some stuff that we see that can move the needle a little
Move
bit
it forward.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think number one, in my personal opinion, I think that we have a desperate need for men to talk to other men.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Right. So
Yes.
I think that one of the most actionable and effective ways that men can shift the current culture that we're living in is for men to talk to other men about modeling integrated masculinity and to continuously show up for them. It's not just like a one and done thing, but like to continuously show up. And men who don't know how to form deep bonds with their male friends and family often turn to the women in their life to do the emotional labor and then cater to their emotional needs while not having any idea of how to reciprocate that.
Yeah.
So for a lot of women, it feels one-sided, right? And I don't believe that men consciously put women in that position. But when we teach boys and men that it's super threatening to experience emotional vulnerability, especially amongst other boys and men, it cuts them off from experiencing authentic connection. And again, this is what I'm saying is leading to that loneliness epidemic. And men
Yeah,
need,
and then because of that, they put you then in the mommy role, right?
right,
They're
right,
like,
or
oh,
the
well, I can't
therapist
talk to my
role.
friend.
Right.
So the mommy or the therapist or
Yep.
the whatever,
Yeah.
the nurturing,
Yep.
the only nurturing thing I have in my life, I'm going to lay it on that thing because I've got no other outlet for
Right.
it,
And like
Yeah.
men need to know and they need to feel like they can be emotionally vulnerable with the people they love without fear of rejection and ridicule. And if men would like to help shift the culture for us all, we need them to learn how to create psychological safety for other boys and men to express their full range of emotions in supportive environments by identifying and talking about their emotions. And so I think that we see that a lot with women holding that space for men. And again, it's not exclusively that. And I do see other men showing up for them, and that always fills me up. But we need more and more men to, again, create that psychological safety for men to be able to express more than rage.
Yeah, I mean, not only do we need to model a more holistic masculine, but we also need to just stop, like I said, bringing all of our issues to the women in our lives. I feel bad because I said what did I say? The nurturing thing in your life. I wasn't objectifying women.
No, I get it.
I was more okay. I was trying to be inclusive in case like we're talking to not just, people who identify as women in that nurturing thing, but
Right.
it ended up sounding like I was objectifying women. But anyway,
That's pretty funny.
this is not to say you shouldn't talk to your partner or your female friends. You definitely should, but these women shouldn't be a stand-in for your therapist, like Nora said, or the male community. Women have been doing a lot of the heavy emotional lifting in relationships for years, and they're exhausted, y'all. I
Yes.
mean, if we love them, we need to give them a break and find other men to share our issues with, or find a therapist we can pay, or both is the best thing we could possibly do, I think.
Yeah,
right?
it's unfortunate that like mental health stuff is expensive in this country, and I really, I think just even having like men's groups, I think that would be enormously beneficial. I think like I'm always encouraging the men in my life to like hang out with their guy friends and make plans and to get together and possibly talk. It's interesting. I'm really fortunate. My husband he's such a good man, and
Yeah,
he
he
has
is.
some really great core guy friends. They're all really good men. Like these are the type of men that if they were single and I had a female friend that was awesome, I would be like, you got to meet so and so.
Yeah.
When I was going through chemotherapy, it was really tough on Kevin, and he was trying to be careful not to, to basically project his emotions about me going through that onto me because I was the one going through it.
Right. You're the one going through it. No, I get it. Yeah.
Exactly. And I appreciated that because I don't know that I could have handled how I was feeling about it and then his emotional range, although I was very in tune to that. But he had some of the best dudes that they would just, my friend Chris has something he does every week called Man Movie Night. And he invites his core guy friends over and they hang out and they watch stupid movies and have dinner together and just chill. And it's just great.
Yeah.
And I would always be like, go over to Man Movie Night. And I know he was able to kind of talk to them about what he was going through and really feel that supportive
Crucial,
environment. Man. Right. And it just made all the difference.
Crucial.
It made all the difference. And so
especially when huge life events like that happen to you, I mean, on the everyday, it's still a great thing to do, but man, when you're in the shit, it is crucial that you've got an outlet like that. That's not your partner.
And these are all other men who I think know wholeheartedly that Kevin will show up for them however they need.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. So anyway,
I'm sure.
All right, let's move on to the next point that we have here, which is mentors.
Okay, which is mentors, and that sort of leaves in perfectly with men talking to other men, right?
Yeah.
I think whatever your age, it really helps to have an older, more experienced man to guide you if you're a young man. If you think about all the crucial things you aren't taught in school, you begin to see the value of a mentor right away. I've always thought, for instance, how to be in a relationship, what to do with your anger, how to be of service, how to sit with difficult feelings, how to grieve something or somebody, how to talk with people who are hurting, or somebody had just had their relative pass away or something like that, how to relate to a loss, how to show up for your friends, how to stay positive, how to manage your money, how to fix your house. There's endless amounts of things that you may get to later in life if you teach yourself, but aren't being taught in the schools. And so these young men don't have a lot of, especially since we've taken out all vocational education from schools, which is one of my huge bugaboos since I taught stagecraft and I was the only vocational class in the school besides,
these are essential life skills,
art,
right?
They're essential skills. And not only that, it allows kids to move around a room in a day when you make them sit still all day long. Yeah. They need to move around. And if they don't want to take dance class, they need another outlet for it. They need, or if they don't think they're talented in art, they need to build things. They need to learn how things work. They need to, all that stuff. But anyway, that's a whole nother podcast. Yeah. But these fundamental skills are what men don't have because A, they're not modeled by society at large, and B, none of them are taught in schools, right? So when I was a high school teacher, I'll tell you a little story here. I tried to go beyond my subject area all the time and teach important life skills like effective communication, empathy, service, personal responsibility, as well as hard skills like how to fix your house if you don't want to call a repairman and spend money. Because a lot of the kids I had, especially in the inner city high school I talked to, they're not calling a repairman. If their roof leaks, they put a bucket under it.
You don't have the money.
If the door is broken, they take it off the hinges and put it out back. They can't afford to fix any of this stuff. So I tried to be like, whenever we weren't building a show, I try to have projects that are like, hey, let's go fix this door, right? So I started this thing that was sort of a school furniture repair program. That was the first thing I did in there. And any teacher could call up with a broken or damaged piece of school furniture, which happens all the time in high school. Yeah. Believe me, you've seen how high school students behave, right? So stuff was always broken. So we had no lack of business, and then my kids would go pick up the piece and then I would show them how to fix it. They would fix it. And then they would bring it back to that teacher. And often it would be a teacher that they had another class with, and they would be like, oh, wow, Dante, did you fix this yourself? And the pride on kids' faces and the feeling that they did something good was so apparent when they got back to the room. They're just walking on air, man. They hadn't had that kind of praise in maybe years, Yeah, so it was a triple win, man. They had a sense of pride. The school had saved money, and the teachers were thrilled to get their stuff back. A bookshelf that they could actually put books on, or something. A lot of it was super easy fixes,
I love that.
And then the other thing I did while I was there to try to model for kids, I developed this thing called the lighthouse, and this is why I have a lighthouse tattoo on my left arm that says "No Lost Causes"
lighthouses
underneath
for
it.
this reason. Yep.
Yeah, for this reason, and also the "No Lost Causes" thing was that was my motto when I was a teacher. There's no kid gets left out, in my class. So I developed this thing called the Lighthouse to further their sense of personal responsibility to each other and develop an empathy and a teamwork and a community within my class and also within the theater in general. And the central idea of that was that we're all lighthouses, you know, we're all guides for ships at sea, but a lot of us never turn on our lights. You know, it's fully within our power to prevent shipwrecks, but only if we turn on those lights. You know, it encouraged the autonomous seeking out of fellow students who were struggling. They were the boats in this scenario, in this analogy, right? And offering whatever help they needed to aid in their success. And that was, I can't tell you what a beautiful thing that was. I don't know why I thought of that, but it just worked from the get-go. And it's something that I'm still proud of to this day. Like, I thought of it first because I had 32 kids in class usually, which is massive for a shop class. I mean, if you got power tools and 32 kids, you need to develop a system where kids aren't going to cut their heads off every single day when you're not watching them, right? Exactly. Yes. So if you have that, including sophomores who are like, you know, 15, and don't know where their bodies are, you need to develop a system where injuries don't happen, where everybody takes care of each other. So this was my attempt to do that. But what happened from it was so much more magical than that. Oh my God. So I had a bunch of kids who were just recent immigrants to the United States, barely spoke a word of English, and they're thrown into this English-speaking high school with no resources whatsoever to get them to do well here, right? So once I'd asked this kid if he would, this bilingual kid, I said, listen, I need you to, I don't want to leave these kids out of this, but I need you to be a translator because my Spanish was crap at the time, you know. Later it got better, but at the time it was crap. And so he took it on like it was his damn job. I mean, that kid, the whole semester, that was his thing. And he was so happy to be given something to do like that helped other people. He was just waiting for an opportunity for service. And I think a lot of boys are just waiting for an opportunity for service. I think you're right. That they can feel good about themselves and help them out of this shame spiral that they're experiencing all the time.
Members of society.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. We need them.
I had another two students that were twins, and they were neurodivergent. They were on the autism spectrum, right? And they needed to know they were the first autistic kids that I taught. Later, I taught many of them at the private school I was at, but they were the first ones I had experience with in a classroom setting. And they needed to know exactly how everything was going to go during the entire class, or it's not comfortable for them. I mean, one of the things about people on the spectrum a lot of the time is like routine is very important. Yeah. Right. Like and not deviating from that, very important. Otherwise, they go into an anxiety spiral and it's really hard to deal with. Right. So I had this other kid I didn't tell him to do this. He just did this. He adopted these twins and he would let them know every single thing that was going to happen as it was going to happen in the class that day, you know, and I would also write it on the board, but he would make sure that they were like calm, secure, taken care of, felt like they had agency, felt like they could do things in the class and that they weren't different from other kids in there. And the whole class then takes on this feeling of like, we need to take care of each other in this boat.
Yeah, it's
cool. Collaborative, but it's also just kind.
Yeah.
It's also just compassionate to people who are different than you. And we have so much othering that happens right now in this country. Like those kind of feelings are what I wanted to model for kids. And wherever I've been, whether it was volunteering for Big Brothers, which I did for 12 years, or teaching high school or leading a dance community in the Bay Area, whatever it is, I've tried to model the behavior and the values that I think are important and that I would like to see more of in the world. And I think we need a lot more of that.
Yes.
You know, young men are lost. They are hungry for guidance outside of the crazy, weird media landscape that they live in on their phones all day long. And it's time for older guys to step up and share their knowledge and wisdom with younger guys. Yeah. And if you're one of the young men who are feeling lost, it's time to get yourself a mentor. And how do you do it? You ask somebody. And it's scary, but listen, find a man you admire and that has the qualities you would like to embody and ask him to mentor you. And not everyone will say yes. You may get a lot of no's. But I know literally tons of men with tons of experience and wisdom who would be thrilled to be your mentor.
Yeah.
So ask if you want one, get one.
Yeah.
You can do it. And that guy will rocket you it will open worlds for you that you never know. You would never know would be open to you. And you will be a different person for having a mentor. You know, my mentors in life, oh my God, they did so much for me. Mr. McGibney, my stagecraft teacher in high school, without that guy, don't know if I would have made it, you know, but he was the one who said, Paul, you're good at this. You can do this. And that's why I went into theater.
That's
He's
amazing.
the only, sorry.
What a gift. What a gift, like the
Yeah.
gratitude, right? Like I know,
Yeah.
I feel the same way. There are so many men in my life that my like I said, the deep wound for me right now is the grief of losing my father, who I feel so
Yeah.
grateful because I mean, he was my first love. It was the first man I
Yeah.
loved, and the way he showed up in the world for himself, but also for me and my brothers and my family and his parents and friends. He modeled just integrity and respect. And it's so important because these men exist in the world, and the world is such a better place with these men in it that can model
Yeah.
that. And
Right.
yeah. And what a beautiful thing that you get to do
And
that.
often they don't get the opportunity to do that. Maybe they're in a line of work where they don't get the opportunity. All that wisdom, it makes me sad to think all that wisdom and all that experience might be wasted.
Yeah.
Because it isn't being passed on, if they're childless or if they're, maybe they just pass it on to their kids, but they could pass it on to so many boys.
For sure.
So many boys and men,
Also-
not just boys, men too,
I'll also say that I think there are a lot of younger boys that look to different men online to be that mentor.
Yep.
And, that can be, it's not, I mean, there are definitely men online who are doing right, but there are a lot of men online that are just perpetuating this kind of culture of shame and isolation. And it would behoove more boys to have a mentor of sorts or several mentors, a group of older men that are able to model in real life.
Yeah. But I mean, one of the things that mentors do is they point you to the good stuff.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if you're young and impressionable, there's a lot of personalities out there that are very attractive because it seems like a cut and dried thing. If you're this, then you're cool. If you're not this, then you're not cool. And that's not the way it works. But sometimes you need somebody older to go, hey man, you know what? That's not such a great idea in a lot of ways, and here's why.
Well,
and here's something that I think might benefit you more.
Well, and this is the reason I say that it's so important for men to model this and for men to show up for other men and boys is because there are plenty of women who see this and try to correct that in young boys, and the message and the impact is nowhere near as strong as when other men show up to correct that.
Because most of the personalities that we're talking about online are ones that devalue women.
100%.
So
yeah,
I mean, it's no wonder they're not listening to their moms. Most of their, most of the voices that they hear in their ear are misogynist voices. Yep. So what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Anyway, I rambled for a long time there. Sorry about that. I got really passionate. I got really passionate.
No, I love it. That is not rambling. That is sharing.
Okay.
All right, let's move on. So we've got.
Let's have you talk for a minute.
Just 1 minute. We've got the next point was we need men embracing nurturing roles at home and in communities. Now, I listen to and observe a lot of discussions that women are having, are continuously having, and are currently having with each other about this need for their partners to step into more of the domestic labor, the child rearing, the emotional labor, lightening the mental load that are often invisible to them, right? And running a household smoothly, let's say like we're talking about people who are partnered in marriages, again, we're coming from the cis hetero version here, so this isn't applied to everything, but this is what we are familiar with and know. But running a household smoothly, raising children, caring for elder parents, all the things that we do in our life, these quote unquote soft skills are literally not valued. Like we don't get paid for this, right? They're not valued. And they're all immensely consuming of our energy. And on top of the household and child rearing labor, many women also have full-time demanding jobs as well. Mm-hmm. And data shows that many women work the quote unquote second shift, which is starting to change, but it's not rapidly changing the way it needs to. And
that's a great name for it, the second shift. And that's exactly what it is. Yeah,
so it's
their other job.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with the term the second shift, it's when, women who have jobs outside of the home, and when they come home from their daytime jobs, they're met with the having to cook and the laundry and the cleaning and the childcare and the scheduling and all the things that run a household and run a family. And it's all work, it's all labor. So a lot of these women need more men to jump in and take on more equal division of labor without looking to their wives and partners to tell them what to do or asking them to make a list. They need
Yeah.
to look around, see what needs to be done, and jump in. And it's because when you start again looking to the wives or the partners, the women, and say, well, like, how can I help, quote unquote? If
Yeah.
it's your household, you're not helping. You're part of that, right?
Right.
Because
You're part. Yeah, exactly.
or if you say
Exactly.
like, well,
when-
just make me a list, that is also putting her in the position of house manager that she probably never asked for. And also it's
Right.
like,
She's not
that's
the manager
another
of the thing.
job,
Yeah.
right? It's another job to be
Yeah.
the house manager. So it's useful to come in, use your resources, and go to your partner as the last resource, right? And
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking in the context of love languages here, this would fall under acts of
Yes.
service, I think. And I read a statistic the other day that was really telling, and that is that roughly double the amount of women rank this as one of their love languages rather than their male counterparts. You know,
Yep.
and that's probably because they're freaking exhausted.
Yes.
Okay, I mean,
my God, yes.
right? Equal division of domestic labor is key in avoiding resentment and having a smooth home life, man. I mean, it's not extra. You're not doing her a favor. It is part of the gig.
Correct.
It is a gift that you give your loved one's well-being on a daily basis. My partner is a busy, powerful woman with a lot of demands on her, and I really relish doing the things that make her life easier so she can have more peace and rest in her every day.
God bless you.
It also removes, well, I mean, here's what it gets me, though. It also removes me from the solipsistic, self-centered thinking that puts me in a service mode, which makes me feel way more useful and ultimately helps dissipate my shame by making me feel like I'm contributing,
Yes.
you know? It makes me feel good about my contributions to the relationship. And because I can see how it lights her up,
Yeah.
you know? It's like, oh my God, the dishes are done. Oh my God, you raked all the leaves in the front yard. You know, I'm always trying to surprise her with new stuff that's gonna make her life easier. And it pays out. It pays so many dividends, not just for her,
Yep.
not just for our domestic life and having a clean psychological slate of a clean house and a nice front yard, but it pays dividends for me all the time.
Yeah, I also want to add to this, and this is something that, I work on. I've been guilty of this. And I know for plenty of women I know that who really want the help, or quote unquote help. They want their partners to jump in. They want a more equitable division of labor in that regard. And
Yeah.
there are plenty of women I know, and I've been guilty of this as well, who also turn into kind of control freaks over you're not doing it right. Right. And so that's something I think a lot of women need to work on as well. If like, I hate this term, but there's more than one way to skin a cat. So if he's not
Yeah.
doing the dishes the way that you would do it, are the dishes still getting done? Great. Move
Yeah.
forward. Right.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, yeah.
so
I mean, we deal with this all the time because we're both Virgos, right? So
good
it's
luck
just
with
like
that.
I want things a certain way. She wants
Yep.
things a certain way too. But sometimes they're not the same way.
Right.
And so
Exactly.
it's a negotiation,
there
man.
is
That's not a big
compromise,
deal.
right? You're going to have some
That's not a big
compromise.
deal.
And like
Yeah.
at the end of the day, if the kids are getting bathed and like the dishes are getting done
Right.
and the laundry is getting done, awesome.
Yeah.
Right. But
Awesome.
so
Yeah.
moving from there, I got to say, recently I saw this clip on Jimmy Kimmel. I think it was like his YouTube page or whatever. And
Yeah.
it was this clip. I'm not sure. I mean, I think it was meant to prove a point and kind of like be funny, but it's not all that funny, really. It's actually pretty
Okay.
sad. But the clip was of
Hit me.
a variety of men who claimed to identify as an involved parent. And they were interviewed next to their children. And the interviewer
Okay.
was asking them a variety of questions about their children, including asking the dads like what their kids' birthdays were, their kids' best friends' names, their teachers' names, their blood types, the color of their eyes, what grade they were in, if the kids had any specific allergies, things like that. And it was like just deeply uncomfortable for me to watch because so many of these men were struggling to answer just basic questions, including like in front of their kids when their kids' birthdays were. And
They did it in front of the
they
kids.
did. And the kids were just, and you
Wow.
could just like kind of feel the kids like feeling invisible in front of their fathers. And you could see kind of the shame of their fathers, like, fumbling through these questions, like, oh, I should know this. And then the interviewers like brought in some of the mothers and asked them, and the moms, of course, answered every question, like every single question correctly. And it just shows like
Man.
that is part of like an enormous mental load that so many
That women carry
carry.
around.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But man, that makes me sad on myriad
too.
levels. I don't think it helps anyone to put this on
I
display for
agree.
humorous purposes. It perpetuates TV's obsession with the dumb dad
And the
character,
Homer
the
Simpson.
Homer
Yeah.
Simpson character, or any sitcom. I mean, we're always portrayed as guys
Peter
who don't. I
Griffin.
mean, that's the other thing. I mean, yeah, Peter Griffin, but you go back to Tool Time and all those other, whatever that show was called, all those other dumb dads in sitcom history, and it's all just a parade of idiots who are just lucky that they have women to hold their stuff together, right? So if that's the model, if the dumb dad is the model, I mean, how are we expected not to live up to that, right? Shirking responsibility, trying to get out of doing stuff, going behind their wives' backs, doing dumb stuff, and then paying for it later. I mean, it's a terrible trope, and I'm tired of it. It shames in this thing. It shames the fathers. It upset the children. Obviously, of course, it's problematic that the fathers don't have this information at their fingertips. Of course, it is. They definitely should have all that information there. But naming and shaming them on TV for a laugh is not going to help that. It is going to increase that shame spiral that we're talking about.
I agree.
Here,
It really was. It's uncomfortable to watch that. At least it was for me. But it's also, I don't. I feel like that clip wasn't intended to reach women as much as it's like trying to hold up a mirror about our society and how dads, like, where the bar is for a lot of these fathers.
Yeah. I mean, I can see that, but I'm not sure that late night comedy is the right venue
I
for
agree.
it.
It's not the avenue.
Maybe with a therapist, with something else,
I
but
agree.
On national TV, probably
I
not.
agree. I'm largely seeing and hearing women who are leaving marriages. I think like right now, I think it's like 70 to 80% of divorces are initiated by women right now, which is like, that's oof.
And what's the reason
I
for
think
that?
it's like I think a lot of it is revolving around the lack of nurturing effort in the family and the relationship dynamics. There's a word for this called weaponized incompetence. I don't know if you've heard of this.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
It's like what is that? Learned. It's like
it's
learned
strategically,
helplessness.
yeah,
It's that kind of
exactly.
thing.
It's strategically avoiding
yeah.
responsibility by pretending to be incapable or inept so that someone else will take over and do it, right? And a lot of
it's what your mom does with the iPad, right? It's what's my
I
Apple
know,
ID?
you're like, oh,
Right?
Jesus.
I don't know what your Apple ID is. I call that learned helplessness before, but I love weaponized incompetence.
Well,
that's like way more serious.
Exactly. And what that really means, it's like hey, can you unload the dishwasher, and being like, doing it wrong or whatever, like, and so that it's
I don't know.
so you don't get asked again. But many women are leaving these relationship dynamics, like, in order for the men to be forced to take over 50% of the responsibilities of their children's lives.
Oh, because they have 50%
Yeah.
custody of the kids
Like,
or whatever. Okay, you get them.
Yeah, I
Good
think
luck.
for a lot of women,
learn how to do
like
it.
you said, they're exhausted by carrying all of this stuff. And like, for a lot of women, it's really unfortunate that they feel like, well, I'm a single mom in a marriage anyway. So if I get a divorce, it just means I'm like, he's forced to take over for 50% and I can get a break. And that's pretty messed up. And of course
that is a very messed up way to think about it.
100% messed up. But, and of course there are many men who are largely stepping into more nurturing roles in their homes and relationships. And I think, with each generation, I think for a lot of like people of our generation, a lot of men in our generation and millennials and like Gen Z, they see that these gender roles in relationships there's not a lot of equity that has been modeled. And I think they're very intently, there's intention about not modeling that behavior for their kids, so that so there is change, but I think by and large we can see in the data that there needs to be more rapid change.
Yeah.
There's still a long way to go.
Agree. All right, should we move on to the next one here?
So.
All right, so that's forgiving yourself and forgiving your father. That's a big one for men for sure. And I mean, my take on this, I mean, we've all got father wounds, and I think, your dad's your superhero when you're younger, especially as a boy. And he's not supposed to be human, right? And a lot of your wound comes from the fact that he lets you down. He's not that superhero, a lot of the time in his behavior or his absentness or whatever it is, and I think the beginning of forgiving that is that to realize that our fathers are just people, they're just men like we are. And if we start by acknowledging that, then, we have amazing strengths, and we have clear weaknesses in all of us. And we're subject to the same temptations, the same emotions, and sometimes the same addictions as our fathers, and the difference comes in the tools that we have to deal with all these things. And, our dads had their own toolbox, and maybe they were doing the best with what they had, but maybe it wasn't much, maybe they just had a hammer, and then everything looks like a nail, as they say, if your only tool is a hammer, and, in our way, we're working to expand that toolbox now. And every generation, I think, if they're conscious of this, tries to expand that toolbox. And although we might not be as skillful as we like all the time, we're trying to, just like our fathers did with what they were given, And a big part of this work for me has been taking things I'm not proud of and forgiving myself for what I didn't know when I didn't know it. And that was that phrase, I think, was given to me by a therapist. I love that phrase, forgiving yourself for what you don't know when you didn't know it, because you can't have a tool before you have it.
It's the whole, when you know better, you do better, right?
That's right. And it's ridiculous to blame yourself for not knowing how to use a saw if you've never used a saw, and there's, it's unfair to judge ourselves and our fathers by some unrealistic rubric of perfection or superhumanism. I often think of the quote by Zen master Suzuki, who taught Zen in the West, that there are no such thing as enlightened people, only enlightened actions, which to me has always meant that enlightenment is not a perfect state that you can hang on to once you've found it. We move in and out of it through our actions. Sometimes we're skillful and sometimes we're not. Perfection is not possible. So forgiveness for ourselves and others is a key part of living in that reality, in the real world, not judging ourselves and our fathers by Pixar type standards, but rather accepting things as they are in the reality, imperfect, messy, sometimes joyful, sometimes not. I think realizing this is the beginning of compassion for yourself.
Yeah.
And for your father and for others.
Yeah. I also want to stress how absolutely important it is for men to continue to show up in their kids' lives. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Again, you don't have to be perfect, but you do have to continue trying and keeping an open line of communication and an open heart, and I just want to say, don't let anyone tell you that your role as a father is not important. We have far too many kids in the society with enormous father wounds. And, it's crucial, I think, for children to have well-adjusted men in their life. Present dads provide such an enormous amount of safety and security. And I'm not even talking about financially there. I'm talking like psychologically.
Yeah.
Present dads just provide a foundation. My dad was flawed, but he was present and he did the best he could with what he had. And I'm so deeply grateful for his role in my life. And I'm so much better because of his influence on me. He modeled integrity, he modeled respect, he modeled responsibility, and I'm able to love men because my father taught me the value of men by showing up in the ways that he knew how.
Yeah.
And I see that.
Right.
And I, again, for the men who are showing up, man, I salute you. It's freaking great. Keep doing that.
Yes, me too.
Keep reaching out to the other boys
Keep
and men
doing it.
so that they keep showing up like that, because your role is crucial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And keep forgiving
Yes.
yourself, man. Keep forgiving
Again,
yourself and keep forgiving your
We're
father.
not going for perfect. We're going for better.
No.
Yep.
No, just better. That's it. All right, Nora, we're on to therapy now. Let's talk about identifying some shame triggers and then talking about them.
Yeah.
What do you think about
So I've learned that learning to identify how your shame manifests, and for me, it's often rage. Good times for everyone involved when it shows up. I'm like, I joke sometimes that like there's, if you don't know anything in Irish culture, there's folklore of the banshee, and like I turn into the banshee. That's like the wailing, like
Yeah.
"Rah!"
I think of more of you like She-Hulk.
Well,
Is
that too.
good?
I mean, that can all.
I like that's my
Yes,
conception of
I
it.
mean,
But anyway, Banshee, She-Hulk, whatever you
same
want
thing.
to call it. Yeah. It's not pretty, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's not fun for anyone when that shows up in my way. But I am learning, like I'm aware. And now when that does, those like triggers show up for me where I feel rage, I'm learning to give myself some space before I like react instead of respond. Right. So it's like, I'll feel it rise in my body. I'll feel the like wanting to Hulk out. And then I usually give myself some space.
See, you're getting
I
into the
am,
metaphor
right?
already. Hulk out,
I'm
baby.
about to
Yeah.
Hulk out and like, I'm like, okay. And then I realize, all right, I'm about to Hulk out here. I want to Hulk out. It's not going to be beneficial to anyone. I give myself some space, and that's usually like, okay, what is the boundary? Either the boundary that's been crossed that's making me want to Hulk out, or what is it that I'm not fully secure with in myself that is like making this insecure, kind of shameful rage, present. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
when those triggers arise and I sit with them and inspect them to see why I feel that way, I'm getting to the root of the root of the problem there, the root of the shame. And when I take those emotions through, it's made me a lot more self-aware, and it dissipates that shame trigger because I can identify it and then I can talk about it. And that's like, I know that's involved, but it's made me made me far more effective in connecting in my relationships and with myself rather than
And with yourself, I was
exactly.
going to say, same with me. Once I've identified the root, I can work
Yep.
with it. Like until you have identified, you can't work with it. You don't know what it is. It can just you can Hulk out and not know why. But meditation for me also helps put a space in between input and output, so I can have a more measured response instead of a reactive one. But it's been therapy that's helped me uncover the deepest ones, the deepest traumas, and bring them to the surface so I can take a look at them and then work with them. And when stuff comes up, be like, whoop, that's the one.
There
Whoop,
it is.
that's the
Right.
one. There it is again. That kind of thing. But yeah, 100%. 100%. And once again, I just want to say that therapy is one of the bravest things you can do. I don't care what anybody tells
agree.
you. I don't care what anybody tells you. It's one of the bravest things you can do is face your own demons.
One of the best
man.
things you can do for yourself.
For sure, it's a gift to
really
yourself,
is.
to your own
It is
well-being.
literal
So
self-care,
Yep. Please, if you can, do it, take advantage of it. All right. Which brings us to the next one, which is stop focusing on externals and go inside yourself until you're fully baked. Now, this is one that I put on the list because I think it's huge for me. It's about interior work, just like therapy is. But I think we as men like to follow programs a lot of the time. I know I do. I like to have it laid out. It's like this plus this gets me that result. This supplement plus that habit plus this sports car equals I'll finally feel okay with myself. That dance that we all do with capitalism, whatever else. But that's not the way that this works, right? Habits and supplements and sports cars don't help you in your own darkness. I think if we think about I think myth can be handy here, right? If we think about the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur, right, for a second, we can get an idea of what our shadow work entails. The condensed version of that story is that Theseus sails to Crete, he's an Athenian, to rid the world of a monster who's the Minotaur, right, who's imprisoned at the center of a labyrinth and is in the habit of eating a bunch of Athenians once a year to Minos, has him come over and then they're fed to the Minotaur, right? And so Theseus decides that he's going to dispatch this monster. And the daughter of King Minos, Ariadne, conspires to help Theseus by providing him with a thread that he can tie on the outside of the labyrinth and will lead him back out once he's killed the Minotaur. In this myth, the labyrinth suggests like that's the puzzle of your psyche, right? The Minotaur is the egoic self with its shame and its fear and its animalistic urges, and Ariadne represents the world that we leave and then return to once we're out of the labyrinth. And the thread itself is our tenuous connection to that world that we hold on to while we do battle with the Minotaur, so we can find our way out again. And it may sound familiar because it's also in Star Wars, right? It's also like in The Empire Strikes Back. There's that scene between Yoda and Luke Skywalker just before Luke enters his own labyrinth, which is the cave of the dark side. And Yoda warns that, that place is strong with the dark side of the Force. It's evil, but you got to go in it, is what he says, And Luke asks what's in there, and Yoda says, only what you take with you, which is such a brilliant line. It's so great. It's so That's the center of it right there. And then as Luke is strapping on his lightsaber, Yoda adds sort of in passing, you won't need your weapons. And Luke's like, yeah, whatever, and takes him in there anyway, So once inside the cave, he faces all kinds of fears in the forms of like creepy reptiles and weird plant life. And then finally, he sees his version of the Minotaur, which is Darth Vader. And they do battle, and Luke cuts off Vader's head in this dark cave. But when he looks at the slain Vader's face, it's his own face, and the message being, we are the slayer and we are the slain. The dark side is part of us, and The weapons that we may find effective in reality, which are the external fixes of, this program, that diet, this car, are useless in the cave. We have to go inside to find out what's causing what we experience on the outside. And if we can kill Darth Vader, we can return to the world as a fully formed Jedi. If we never enter the cave, we never mature past the grasping, complaining, victimized child mode, Like, you remember how immature and annoying Luke was until this experience, right? He's always like, oh, Uncle Owen, why can't I go to town? I was hoping to go to town and hang out with my friends. And he's like, Luke, you got to fix the sand, whatever. I don't remember what
Luke?
it is. Anyway, right? But, so it's that story. And so what we do use to kill the Minotaur, since our worldly weapons are useless, right? We use compassion, we use forgiveness, we use love. If we show our darkness, these type of things, the parts of it that don't serve us, cease to grow. They become quiet and they start to shrink. Now, the parts that are left, and there are some parts left that are actually good, right? Those parts, the useful parts that remain, they're then integrated into our personality in a healthy and holistic way. So in a sense, we don't kill anything. I don't like the killing metaphor. It's just what happens in myth a lot of the time, right? You slay the dragon, you kill Darth Vader, you kill the Minotaur, whatever it is. But you don't kill anything. We're not talking about killing parts of yourself. We're talking about, working with parts of yourself to minimize the things that don't serve you, and then magnifying those things that do serve you, and then integrating those things in a more healthy way. And it's more subtle than killing something and being done with it. You're not really done with it either. Your dark side can pop up in different ways again, and then you work with it again. You go back into the labyrinth and you come out again. It's not a one-shot deal, And of course, most men would rather literally do anything than enter the labyrinth to begin with, because it takes actual courage to do it, instead of like performative courage that we see in action movies or something. We would sooner, Nora, kill ourselves, kill others, hurt our loved ones, and destroy our lives than face our own darkness.
We see
sometimes,
that in the news every day.
It happens all the time, right? But nobody can enter the labyrinth to face your own unique Minotaur, though, right? Nobody but you. And to repeat Yoda's admonition one more time, that place is strong with the dark side. It is evil, but in it you must go, he says. And I apologize for the double metaphor here, but I thought it was important to realize that once again, this is an old story, and there are many fingers that point to the same moon.
That's no moon. That's a space station.
Oh man, it was not a very good Obi-Wan impression, but oh man, I don't know whether to be jealous that I didn't think of that or simply bow down to you out of respect. But pulling out Obi-Wan quotes is amazing. Thank you for that. I love that. Thank you very much. And that brings us. Anyways, did you have anything to say about that?
I think you're right on there, and I actually, I hate saying the word actually. It makes it sound like I love the metaphors used there, and especially tying in the Star Wars, because who doesn't love Star Wars? And it's
more relatable to most people, because most people don't do the Greek myth thing. But anyway,
that's pretty brilliant. Anyway,
all right, let's push on, shall we, to our next one here?
All right, moving on. The next thing I had listed here was calling other men in instead of calling them out. And here's what I mean by that. So little difference between calling in and calling out. Calling out's useful when you need to let someone know when their behavior is unacceptable or when it must be interrupted to avoid causing more harm. It's also a signal to the wider community, right?
Yeah.
Calling in is useful if you want to engage someone in a deeper discussion for better understanding and reflection.
I think that the latter one is much more useful in most situations, right?
I agree, because I think calling out often creates shame, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like it's almost feels like a public humiliation sometimes, I think, for people is how they experience it. Where calling in feels like a little more caring.
Yeah. A lot more caring, I think. Yeah.
A lot more caring, right? A lot more like respectful of like, hey, let me point some things out to you, and, let me lead you and guide you through this, kind of like a mentor,
Yeah.
And I keep thinking of this, this particular scene from the TV show Ted Lasso. And we've talked about Ted Lasso on the podcast before. And if you've seen the show, if you haven't seen the show, you should watch it. It's amazing. It really tackles men's mental health and all the things that we're talking about right here.
Indeed.
In this particular scene, There's a character named Jamie Tart who is kind of like the super egoic, insecure, but really fantastic, like the star player of the team.
Classically
And he's
macho crap, though, in terms of his
completely,
attitude,
yeah,
really puts on a
kind of
character. Yeah,
womanizer,
womanizer.
kind of
Yeah.
like,
Super
immature,
self-absorbed, super into his
exactly.
own looks, things like that.
His image,
His
the whole
image. Yeah.
nine. Now, the other character on the team that butts heads with him a lot is a character named Roy Kent. And Roy Kent is kind of like he's the guy that's like, he's carrying the shame. He's the older guy on the team, and he's got some internal shit with that, where he's like, he has to do ice baths after every game, but he doesn't want to admit that like he's in pain. It's
Yeah.
one of the things that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. Playing her.
Anyway, in this particular scene, Jamie, it's like they're in the middle of a game versus Manchester, which is where Jamie Tart is from, and he comes from more of this like working class background, and it really explores like the father wound in this particular scene. But in the scene, they're the Ted Lasso's team that Jamie and Roy Kent play for. They're falling behind on Manchester, and it's like is it halftime? I don't even know. It's
halftime. Yep.
in soccer. Yeah, so it's halftime. They're in their locker room, and Jamie's father comes, and he's just this like, his dad's just a dick. Let's just put it that way. His dad is just this insecure dick. And it's in front of the whole team where his dad is kind of berating, he's kind of berating Jamie and essentially calling him a loser with like amateur teammates. So he's kind of insulting Jamie to his face with the team in this way. And his father ends up calling Jamie, his son, a moody bitch. And Jamie says, "Don't talk to me like that." He like kind of sets a boundary, and there's this tension, this building tension in this scene. Jamie turns away from his dad, and his dad shoves him, saying, "Don't turn your back on me, you little pussy." And that's when Jamie turns around. He's like, he has had enough, and he clocks his father in the face. And his dad is dragged out of the locker room, yelling at him that he shouldn't forget where he came from. And like, basically, it's just an awful, really tense, really terrible moment where the whole team is just like watching in horror, not knowing what to do. So while the team is sitting there stunned, with Jamie in the middle of the room, who's trying to process what's happening, you can see like the overwhelm and the anxiety, like, coming over him as his dad gets dragged out.
Well, and the shame of not only being called out in front of his team, but also the father wound completely open and on display for everybody to see.
Completely open on display. But it becomes this moment where typically where Jamie and Roy Kent really butt heads because of the ego and all that. It's where Roy and the entire team finally sees it's exposed of why Jamie is the way he is.
Right.
That father wound.
Yeah.
It's then when Roy just doesn't say anything, he just silently walks up to Jamie and hugs him. And like at first Jamie just doesn't know what to do, and Roy just continues to hug him, and then Jamie just breaks down in his arms sobbing. And it's just such a moment that gels in the series of where it's the turnaround of where Jamie's personality starts to heal.
Yeah.
And he starts to be
beginning
able
of
to
his
show up better.
redemption. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
as well as Roy's,
As well
where
as
they
Roy's.
start to become cohesive, and it's almost like Roy becomes his mentor on the team.
Yeah.
It just shows this. I mean, it's fantastic writing.
This is probably my favorite scene of the whole series because I know what kind of courage that took on Jamie's part, but also on Roy's. It can be uncomfortable at best and dangerous at worst to cry in front of men or to show compassion and affection for another man. And listen, I have a hard time just holding it together, just thinking about that scene because it's so. Because there's a hole in me that needs that, that needs that to be there, and it's so absent in the world that we can show affection for other men in that way and support other men in that way. It just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen.
And this is why I love that show. It's like such a deeply therapeutic thing to like write in there, because I imagine that so many men feel that at their core, and just know like that. I think for a lot of men watching that show, they feel that deeply, and they want that community. They want that safe place to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
But that to me was like kind of Roy calling in Jamie.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, for sure. All right, Nora. Okay, well, we have gone over our regular time limit. Not that there's a limit, but listen, this subject, and we just talked about one aspect of masculinity, really. I mean, it
So
could be many, many, many
complex.
episodes, and I'm sure it probably will be in the future. We'll spread them out, but
Hmm.
I think it at least deserved this much time. So let's bring it in
I
for a
agree.
3-point landing here, right? So
Hmm.
number one, what we're talking about is men are suffering, and the root cause of
Yes.
most of it is our shame and inability to express our feelings in healthy ways and have opportunities
Yep.
to do that. That's one.
Hmm. Yeah. The other is shame. It's a useless emotion. It doesn't do anything but try to devour us whole.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it doesn't, it really, there's no good side of shame. There's that
and
I
again,
can think of. Yeah.
I, talking about your shame is the way to dissipate it.
Right. That's it. I mean,
Yeah,
you
to
have,
bring it to light.
yeah, you have to have somebody to talk to or else you just keep spiraling in there and you can't, it's hard to
Yep.
get out yourself.
Yep.
You
I
gotta
agree.
talk it out with somebody. And there is a way out. And that is, through facing your Minotaur, like I talked about, your Darth
Hmm.
Vader, being mentored, going to therapy, and, most of all, forgiving yourself. And you can find a path to a strong, integrated masculinity that doesn't have to prove itself in the myriad dick measuring contests it encounters, which it encounters all the
Hmm.
time. And listen, on a personal note, before we go, I just want to say, I'm going to try to hold it together while I say this. Out of all the episodes we've done so far, this one is very close to my heart. Not just because I've experienced a lot of what we've talked about, but because I see my brothers in so much pain and confusion these days, and it's causing a lot of problems for ourselves, and it's causing a lot of problems in the world. We need to do better. We need to start taking care of ourselves and the people around us. We need to step out into a mature masculinity that includes an integration of our darkness and our light so we can find a masculine equilibrium that's strong and action-oriented, but also yielding and compassionate. You can try to do that by following gurus or participating in hypercapitalism or getting laid every night or drinking yourself into a stupor, but that shit is Band-Aids on a broken leg.
Hmm.
It's self-love and compassion and forgiveness that mend the break. And I hope for all our sakes that you'll give them a try,
Amen, dude.
And Nora,
Amen. Thanks for, yes.
I love you.
Oh, you beat me to
For
it.
once, I beat you to it.
The competition, man.
It's all,
I'm down.
it's a love.
I love you too, Paul.
I love it. Love competition is okay with me. That's all right. Whoever wins, it's all going to be love. It's great. It's great.
Who can say it first?
No winners.
Yeah, and if also to all the men listening, we love you as well.
Yeah.
And even if you are having a hard time finding that love for yourself, there's plenty of love in the world, and there are plenty of people who love men. And even if it feels like sometimes that men are just like getting the short end of the stick all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, we see you.
We're here for you. We
Keep
see
going.
you. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, Nora.
Yep.
Well, I'll see you next time in the studio.
Yep.
All right.
We'll be here.
Bye.
Know what that was. Okay, bye. Yeah.
Freedom over fame. Freedom over cycle stays the same.
If you'd like to get in touch with us about anything you've heard on the show, please feel free to drop us an email at ifweonlyknewthenpod@gmail.com.